BYU can win the Big 12. But are they anything more than that?
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in this, the greatest sport on planet Earth, whatever those stories may be. This episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Jake Hatch of Locked On BYU Cougars is joining me. I have many thoughts on the SEC officials' debacle in Austin and whether Texas is in trouble and maybe the game of the year in the G5. For now, it's happening this week in Las Vegas. But Jake, BYU hasn't lost a football game yet, just as I predicted before the season.
We all predicted that.
Yes, indeed. Especially me. But I look at what BYU's doing, and they're just winning football games. That's the only way to accurately describe, I think, how they have played this season. They have done it in different ways. It doesn't look the same. They haven't always been able to play offense, but they played offense on Friday night. They have come back. They have led. They've dominated. They've done all sorts of things. They're just winning football games. But are they anything more, in your view, than a Big 12 championship contender?
I think they are, as you mentioned, they can figure out some of their offensive issues. If the running game can come around, LJ Martin had his best game of his career as a BYU Cougar this past game. And if that continues, that trend continues, and the running game comes alive for BYU, yeah, they absolutely could be a player when it comes to the postseason and potentially college football playoff and the like. But until that happens, there are still question marks around this team.
One reason, perhaps the primary reason for some people, the host of this show, people were down on BYU was Jake Retzlaff, who is not lighting the world on fire, Jake, but much like the BYU football team, he looks to be playing winning football. How confident are you in his ability to carry this team to wherever they can go?
He has shown a renewed sense of knowing who he is as a player. He knows he's not Joe Montana, for lack of a better comparison out there, where he's going to be absolutely dominant. But the one thing he is, Spencer, he's a gamer. He will do whatever is necessary to win games. You mentioned the fact that they came back in this past game. He had a play where it looked like he was angling out of bounds. Obviously, he stopped the clock. He noticed that the defender was kind of thinking, okay, he's going to run out of bounds. Cuts it up inside of him, picks up, I think it was like 20-some-odd yards, gets BYU in scoring territory. The very next play, they score that game-winning touchdown. And it was absolutely incredible, that play. And it just kind of screamed to me, this is a kid who understands who he is as a player. He's matured a lot over the past year and change as BYU starting quarterback. And I think he wholly understands that no matter what, the stats be damned, go do your job and win the game.
Yeah, and he has done that. And I mean, no better example than Friday night against Oklahoma State. You got a 4th and 7 on your own side of the 35-yard line. You're down 4, and you wind up winning the football game? Well, I mean, what a night that was at Lavelle Edwards Stadium.
Well, I'll just say on that 4th and 7, if you rewatch that play, Chase Roberts, who he ended up connecting with to convert on that down, was open for I don't know how long on that play. And for whatever reason, Jake refused to throw the ball to him. He acknowledged it in postgame. He said he was way too open. I felt like, you know what, there's something I'm not seeing out there that if I throw this to him, he eventually threw it to him, converts it, and as you mentioned, the rest is history. So they marched right down the field after that and scored the game-winning touchdown. But yeah, it's a whole thing with the mindset of Jake, is he's like, you know what, I just want to win football games no matter how I have to do it.
BYU has an incredibly manageable schedule coming down the home stretch here. And look, going undefeated is really hard. I don't care who you are, what conference you're in. It's a really difficult thing to do. But boy, it kind of seems like BYU could do that, right?
They could do it, yes, but BYU knows as well as anybody that winning all your games in a given season is as tough as anything. The only time they've ever done it, they won a national title in 1984, and obviously things had to happen around them to get that championship get it to Provo. But yeah, they understand what they're up against here, because the FPI, all of these metrics out there say that BYU is performing beyond what they should be at this point. But the mindset of this team, if you ask any player or coach or any other member of the staff inside that football program, they are focused on the here and now. So, for example, this week it's UCF. It's all about the Knights. They're not focused on Utah 3 weeks out. They're not focused on a Big 12 title game burst potentially down the line. The whole focus is on the here and now. And so long as they keep that mindset, Spencer, it's going to give them a fighting chance to make the run that they're hoping to make.
They can say that Utah's not on their minds at all. I'd be shocked if it hasn't crossed somebody's mind at some point.
Well, it has, and that's never far away because these two programs are so intertwined with one another, both in the community and inside the football programs. Heck, half of BYU staff worked for Kyle Whittingham up at Utah. Kalani, chief among them, Jay Hill, Aaron Roderick, all former Utah staffers. So they know about each other, and yes, there is some thought that's crossed the back of their mind, but they understand if they don't beat UCF, the whole thing of that game, the luster that it would carry going into it undefeated would be dampened quite a bit.
You mentioned the FPI not loving BYU, thinking they're punching above their weight. I would never have that thought or observation, Jake. No. I am the conductor of the BYU hype train and have been from the moment this season kicked off. But what is it that you think those analytics numbers don't like about BYU?
I think it's just the fact that BYU's run game was non-existent or kind of getting by for a long stretch of this season. As I mentioned when we started this segment, is the biggest thing is BYU's got to have that run game really come alive if they want to make that run. And I think that also you look at the defense, there are metrics out there that indicate the defense has been getting by with turnovers and obviously the offense cashing those in on short fields. I look at this past week as an example. Oklahoma State ran for 269 yards against BYU. That is a glaring
in Provo.
In Provo, yes. Guess what? Guess where they're going this next week? Oh, to UCF. What did UCF do last week in a narrow loss to Iowa State? Oh, they ran for 354 yards. Well, that's an issue if BYU can't stop the run because you're going to an opposing team's home venue, and if they can run at will against you, that's going to make it extremely difficult to win that game.
Can BYU win a national championship this year?
Ooh, I'm not ready to go to that level because I think there's a lot of really good football teams out there. But here's the deal. When BYU won that national championship in 1984, as I mentioned, a lot of things happened around them. 40 years to the 40 years after that fact, I can't say it wouldn't happen, but I'd be hard-pressed to say right now that BYU is a true national title contender.
UCF on tap this week. FanDuel's got that as BYU -1.5, and boy, that makes my alarm bells go off, the likes of which we haven't seen since LSU Arkansas last week. And boy, I nailed that prediction, right? Hit the nail right on the head and pounded it into the floorboard there. What do you make of this game against the Knights?
BYU should be wary. Here's the thing. This UCF team is on a 4-game losing streak, but all those losses have had moments where they probably could have, would have, should have won. Most notably, obviously, this Iowa State game. It took late-game heroics, much like BYU did against Oklahoma State, for Iowa State to pull out that victory over the Knights. BYU's got to be very wary of this team. If they think they're going to go in there and the Knights are just going to roll over because they've lost 4 straight, they got another thing coming, and they can find themselves getting boat raced.
Jake Hatch, Locked On BYU Cougars. Appreciate it, Jake.
Thanks as always.
The SEC officials screwed up to get it right. I'm talking about that next. Hey, Locked On College Football fans, time to recognize the Roy Player of the Week. So far this season, we've pooled over $20,000 to support players on Roy. Micro deposits lead to massive change. With the Roy app, you can direct your support to the athletes you love, ensuring that all funds go to the specific player that you choose. And the best part, it's risk-free. If the athlete transfers or doesn't deliver the content that you're looking for at the end of the season, you get your money back because you can get things like personal videos and updates after the year. This week, the Roy Player of the Week, it's Jalen Walker over at Georgia because let me tell you, that guy played some good football, looking a little bit like Trayvon Walker throughout the game. 3 sacks against Texas. The Georgia defensive line was wreaking havoc, and they got the big win at Texas to knock off the #1 team in all the land. Plus, don't miss out on Roy's exciting giveaway. Win 2 tickets to a game in November. Just download Roy, create an account, enter referral code LOCKEDON, and you're entered. That's it. Are you already on Roy? Any contribution to an athlete's campaign also gets you entered automatically. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Download Roy now. Get in on the NIL game with no subscriptions, no fees, and be sure to check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Roy_ReturnOnYou for more info. Roy, support the players, change the game. Should Texas be worried? Quinn Ewers was benched momentarily against Georgia. Now, Georgia has, shocker, one of the premier defenses in all of college football. So not playing your best game against Georgia, I don't know how much of an indictment that is on a quarterback. Though for a guy like Quinn Ewers, who has NFL aspirations, who is a top 5 quarterback prospect in the country, it's not a great look. Now, conversely, if you're worried about Quinn Ewers, you'd have to also be worried about Carson Beck. Did you know that he threw 3 interceptions and was under 200 yards passing on Saturday? Yeah, that's a real thing that happened. And by the way, go back to the first half against Alabama. Carson Beck was not any good. And I've been a big Carson Beck fan. He's a big reason that I picked Georgia to win the national championship before the season, because you got a veteran quarterback. You've got a productive quarterback and a guy who I think has got tons of potential, but he has not quite looked right. He is not gelling with those weapons. So if you're worried about Texas, you should be worried about Georgia. That said, I don't think Texas has a problem here. I thought Joel Klatt made a really good point that the taking out of Quinn Ewers in that game was less about we think Arch is better, because, Arch missed a couple throws. One in particular had a guy wide open underneath. The receiver's like, oh, why didn't you give me the ball? He wanted to take the downfield shot. He wanted to make the explosion play. I think he was trying to get Quinn Ewers a reset. By the way, it worked. Quinn Ewers returns to the game and ends up throwing a couple of touchdowns. Now, his numbers are not blowing anybody away, and he's got to clean up the turnovers where he just stares a guy down. But I think for Texas going into this week's game against Vanderbilt, which I'll get to in just a moment, I don't think you have a quarterback debate here. I don't think it's, well, should Arch Manning play shit? No. The answer is no. I know that Arch Manning had some great games against competition Texas was clearly better than. Tell me, when he went into the game for Quinn Ewers, did you notice a sizable jump? Yeah, he's put into a tough spot. But when a guy replaces someone who had been named the starter, and then he ends up just staying there, you tend to see that click a little bit. I didn't see a click with Arch Manning. One game. Not a huge sample size against legitimate competition. I don't think Texas should be out on Quinn Ewers. This is a guy who in the same system won a conference championship a year ago, was in the college football playoff semifinal, and can still lead Texas back there again this season. You just have to clean a couple of those things up. And look, there are veteran quarterbacks not playing well in the SEC. Quinn Ewers has not been playing well. Carson Beck, not playing well. Jalen Milroe can't take care of the football at the moment. Are you just going to punt on him? Are you just going to pull him, say, they're no good, we can't? I don't think that's the best path forward. I think you have to work through the difficulties they're undergoing right now, and you got to find a way through it, because they still are giving you the best chance to win, even if they're not playing well. Because I've seen the potential. It's not like these guys have never played well in big games. Jalen Milroe, SEC championship. Carson Beck, we've seen it time and again. Not, necessarily in a national championship setting just yet, but that's why he came back. I've got faith that Carson Beck can indeed figure it out. I've seen Quinn Ewers do it too. So, no, I'm not on the let's play Arch Manning. Let's make him the start. I think Steve Sarkisian wanted to get Quinn Ewers a break, get him a reset, and it worked. And now you carry that forward going into a game against Vanderbilt. I hope, for Texas's sake, they're not overlooking Vanderbilt. Did you know that Vanderbilt is ranked in the top 25? It's wonderful. It really is. I don't know how you can be a college football fan of literally any team and not think Vanderbilt being ranked is one of the best stories of the year. I don't care if it lasts. I don't care if they miss a bowl game, even though they're 5-2 at the moment after not overly impressing against Ball State. But you've got a top 25 showdown in Nashville this week. Yeah, that's right. Top 25 showdown. You've got Texas and you've got Vanderbilt. Good old Vanderbilt. Clark Lee and company, Diego Pavia, they're just rolling. They're just rolling by Vandy standards, of course. They still have a loss to Georgia State on the resume, but Texas is favored by about 18.5 points. 18.5 points. That's a lot. How many do you think Alabama was favored by? It started with a 2, and that's all that matters. So don't tell me that Vanderbilt can't pull another upset here, because they have already won as a 22-point underdog and as a 14.5-point underdog. And that second game at Kentucky was on the road. So Vegas, look, the AP voters are giving Vandy their due respect. Vegas is not. Texas better have things figured out. They better get Quinn Ewers settled back in, because Vanderbilt is a solid football team. I'm not saying they're great, but you can't tell me they're bad. I've watched them play well. Remember what one of their 2 losses was? They went to Columbia, Missouri, and took the Tigers to overtime. College kickers were absolutely off their rockers in that one. If they hadn't been, Vanderbilt could have won the game. Vanderbilt could be a 6-1 football team right now. It's entirely possible. Shout out to Clark Lee. Shout out to Jordan Rogers as well. He's got to be happy, and he should be. He really should be, and so should Clark Lee. They could become bowl eligible if they beat Texas this week. I don't think they're going to, but don't tell me it can't happen. Don't tell me, well, they could, that they won't do it again. I don't know. If you said that about them doing it once, why couldn't it happen again? Texas is trying to sort things out, and Quinn Ewers doesn't look like himself just yet. But Steve Sarkisian needs to look at this game not just as an opportunity to win a football game, avoid another conference loss, avoid an upset, and keep control of your own destiny to make the playoff. You got to use it as an opportunity to get Quinn Ewers back on the train tracks because he's off the rails, relatively speaking, right now. So, speaking of Texas and Georgia, the officiating nonsense that led to the right call was indeed nonsensically bad. Horrific precedent set by the SEC officiating crew. Absolutely, positively unacceptable. It is unacceptable that you can make 2 mistakes in one sequence. Mistake number 1, that's not pass interference. It's not. It's not even close. Flag never should have been thrown. Kirby can say whatever he wants. Deep down, he's got to know that's not pass interference. You see it, I see it, fans see it, broadcasters see it, everybody saw it. Bad call. When you make a bad call and the fans are mad and they start throwing a fit and toss stuff on the field and you use that as an opportunity to change the call, what are you thinking? Are you thinking? Reminds me of a scene from That 70s Show where Eric and Hyde have done something stupid. That's a recurring theme. And Kitty goes over to them and says, "Boys, what were you thinking?" And then Hyde looks at her and goes, I got it, Miss Foreman. We weren't thinking. That's what the SEC officiating crew is doing. You thought through the process. You thought it was a good idea to reverse a call that can't be reversed. If you have a discussion in real time, you can say there is no flag for pass interference, first down Texas. You can do that. You don't do it after the replay's been shown, after objects have been thrown on the field. I mean, complete buffoonery. Complete buffoonery of the highest order that this was allowed to transpire. And I will reiterate once again, I am in support of officials being held publicly accountable. How do we not have the head of that officiating crew coming to a podium after the game in which a lot of people have a lot riding on the line, and that could have proven to be an impactful call in the game? It was an impactful call in the game. And by the way, the end result was correct. The end result, Texas got the ball. That's what should have happened. That process, horrifically managed. There's no public accountability here. Well, they have internal processes. It's going great. It's going great. And I get so annoyed anytime I hear someone say that. Well, they're graded. Well, they get judged. They do this. Well, it's not working. I don't care what your process is. It's not working in any way, shape, or form. Completely unacceptable. But they made 2 wrongs to make a right. Because flags never should have been thrown, but it gets thrown. They overturn it. 2 wrongs make a right? I guess. Yeah, I just complete insanity there. By the way, Texas A&M plays LSU this week. You know who's the biggest Texas A&M fan in the world? Notre Dame. A lot of wins in college football don't look quite as strong over time. How much better does that Notre Dame win look at Texas A&M if they beat LSU this week and remain unbeaten in SEC play? You might have written off Mike Elko and the Aggies. I didn't. I kept watching them going, good football team. Look, good football team again. And they keep doing that, and it's going to be a really fun game. So Notre Dame has got a watchful eye on the SEC to make sure their win cancels out their loss against Northern Illinois, who are losing games in Mid-American Conference play. Yeah, that's the thing that's happening too. College football is wild, isn't it? but boy, is it fun. You know what's going to be fun? Friday night, Las Vegas, Boise State, UNLV. Playoff ramifications are abundant here. They're abundantly clear, and you need to be aware of them. That's coming up next. First, a reminder, this episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. Do you want to bet all these games that I talk about on the show every week? Do you want to have a little action, a little juice? FanDuel's the place to do it. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you're placing your bets. So everything that you want, college football, NFL, anything else, it's all over there on FanDuel. And you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So do you think that Texas A&M is beating LSU? You can go put your money where your mouth is. Do you believe Texas will get a bounce back and steamroll Vanderbilt and cover 18.5 points? You can go bet that over at FanDuel.com. They're America's #1 sportsbook, and you should go check them out at FanDuel.com. Since I have been hosting the show, I have had a saying. Far be it from me to overlook that the group of 5 is getting a team into the playoff this year. Boy, that could be Boise State. It could also be UNLV. So the Rebels should be an undefeated team. They quite literally dropped a game-winning interception twice on the field. They're playing Boise State Friday night in a G5 showdown when they were playing Syracuse a couple weeks ago. They went on the road to Corvallis this week and won a football game. It's not an easy thing to do. Oregon State decimated along the defensive line, but Corvallis is not an easy place to win, and UNLV was able to accomplish that. I give them their flowers. I don't look back after the fact and say, well, it was just this. No, I'm not the turnabout sort of guy. I think I've made that very clear on the show over the last couple of months. But UNLV having one loss, none in the Mountain West. Boise State, one loss, none in the Mountain West. And Boise State's lone loss of the year by 3 points on the road to the now #1 team in the AP poll in all of college football. So yeah, you should look at Boise State and say, they're the favorites to make the college football playoff. But this has all the makings of the game of the year in the group of 5, because you've got a couple of teams who have built legitimately strong group of 5 resumes. Boise State's best win, probably Washington State. I will touch on them more in a couple of minutes and explain why that is a really quality win in addition to a high quality loss. And by the way, UNLV, their lone loss that I mentioned to a Syracuse team that plays Pitt later this week. And, well, earlier than everyone else, but later than when this show is coming out, of course, Syracuse has only lost 1 football game. Pretty good first year for Fran Brown and company. Kyle McCord is throwing it all over the field. Left, right, short, long, middle, left corner, right corner, everywhere. Kyle McCord is just, he's throwing it there and doing so successfully. But Boise State has been a dormant brand compared to what they were. Do you know that there was a time where a non-conference matchup was played between Boise State and Georgia, and it is a top 10 matchup, and Boise State won? Do you remember that? I remember that. I was not literally there, but I was watching, and I remember, and Boise State, for this season, we'll see what happens when Ashton Jeanty isn't back there, because he is quite literally the most unstoppable player in all of college football. He'd have my Heisman vote right now. He would. He would. I'd have Travis Hunter second and Cam Ward third. But Ashton Jeanty is doing something statistically that we just haven't seen in a very, very long time. So I look at this Boise State team and say they had a surprise quarterback battle in which Maddox Madsen beat out a former 5-star recruit in Malachi Nelson, one-time USC Trojan, and he's a backup. And Max Madsen, he's just winning football games. He's not going to blow you away. He's not going to tear everything up and go for 400 yards, because the best play Boise State has is here. Ashton, come run the football. We're going to give it to you now. And then he takes it, and then he runs through the entire defense. It looks like huddle highlight videos of 5-star running backs who have no business playing against high schoolers in a remote part of the country where you don't have another Division I football player on the field. That's how he has looked the entire season. He did that against Oregon. He did that against Georgia Southern. He did it against Washington State. He has done it against everybody. And it's going to be on full display. It doesn't matter whether you know it's coming. The Boise State offensive line unsung hero of the season for the Broncos, to be sure. But this guy is breaking tackles at a rate I just haven't seen before. And it's a difficult thing to stop. UNLV's defense, let's just say they've had their moments this year. But ever since that quarterback changed, the last time you probably heard about UNLV football, it was Matthew Sluka and NIL and another running back had opted out. They almost look like a better team. And Barry Odom, Brendan Marion, that entire coaching staff, they deserve a lot of credit. They deserve a lot of credit for the way they handled that situation and that they have put themselves into a legitimate spot to be a Mountain West title contender and a player to get the college football playoff spot from the group of 5 ranks. So this game has all the makings of one you look back on and say, hey, that decided who got to the playoff. Because Boise State and UNLV are building legitimate resumes right now and beating each other, big boost. They could meet each other again in the Mountain West Championship game. I can see that happening. I can absolutely see that happening. But UNLV, that's a good football team. And Boise State is more than just one player. Yes, Ashton Jeanty is great, but they are a good football team. Better be at their best on Friday night. They are on the road in Las Vegas. I'll have a pick later in the week. But this game, don't overlook how big of a football game this is. Because on the horizon in the Group of 5 playoff chase, here comes Army. Here comes Navy. Navy's got Notre Dame this week. Better not overlook that one either. But what if Army or Navy beats Notre Dame? Entirely plausible, might I add, given that Notre Dame has had a propensity to have a lot of peaks and valleys so far this season. So what if Army or Navy start to rise in the rankings? You know what a differentiator will be to be the highest ranked Group of 5 conference champion? A win over a team like UNLV or Boise State. Makes a difference. Having a high-quality loss. Boise State's got the better of the 2 losses, so UNLV probably needs it a touch more. But I tell you what, I'm excited to watch that football game. Boise State's best win to date is Washington State, who continues to just be a good football team. They've got 7 Mountain West opponents and a handful of others, and they're just good. Washington State's good. Now, I got a couple of comments and messages from people saying, hey, should Washington State be ranked? Shouldn't they be in the top 25? I understand the instinct there. Washington State is 6-1. They have got wins over Texas Tech, and they have got wins over Washington. Here's the problem that they're running into. Their lone loss is on the road against Boise State, but they've got a pair of Power 4 wins. The case for them to be ranked is readily available, can easily be made, and they're not that far from being inside the top 25. The reason I think they're not is those 2 Power 4 wins suffered bad losses last time they took the field. Baylor went into Lubbock and housed Texas Tech. They're still a solid football team, but that doesn't help. I'm just telling you what the AP voters are likely arriving at from a conclusion standpoint to leave Washington State out. And Washington has lost to Iowa and Rutgers. Those are not the most quality losses. Iowa went to Michigan State in maybe my best upset pick of the week and lost to the Spartans. Rutgers lost to UCLA. So the quality of those wins, though still respectable, have been diminished in the eyes of the college football world. And so this is still Boise State's best win. If you're comparing Group of 5 resumes, it's going to continue to be a quality win. Washington State is not going to lose a lot of football games. I predicted them 9-3 before the season. That feels like bare minimum floor. Go look at the rest of their schedule. Who's beating them? They still play Oregon State. Feels a lot like Washington State is a much better team of our friends over in the Pac-2. So I think that for Boise State, that win is still quality and is a resume booster. And it's going to continue to become that. And for Washington State, yes, you can make the argument that they're ranked. But the problem is they have a loss, and Army and Navy do not. And they like that 0 in the loss column. And their wins are not looking as strong. But I'm not devaluing them in a major way, because Washington's still going to be a bowl team in the Big Ten, and so is Texas Tech in the Big 12. So if you have those 2 wins, one close and one was not, by the way, they rolled Texas Tech at home all the way back in week 2. Washington State will find their way into the top 25. They cannot win 10 games and not be ranked by the end of the year. If they win again this week, if they win again next week, if Washington State wins 2 more games, they're sitting there 8-1, they'll find their way in the top 25. Help will always be given to those at Hogwarts who hold their own. That is often the case in college football. So if Washington State keeps winning, they'll find their way back into the top 25, and Boise State will just look up and go, oh, thank you. That's adding to our resume. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.